So if I may ask you, sir, what is money?
This is maybe the one I don't have an answer for. Behind money in the Bible is the whole issue of stewardship and
Mhm.
managing resources that God provides us with is actually one of the most important core values of the entire Bible. There's a corporate benefit to us pooling at least some of our resources that we each earn that privately belong to us so that we can accomplish certain things corporately in our society together.
There's some attack surface there for like socialism, communism rhetoric, right? Try to get people to do what's in the collective interest, even at their own expense. So, how do we protect ourselves against those kind of pseudo religious ideologies when we're trying to do something
I
that's
think
for the collective
I
good?
think the best protection is kind of where we were a while ago, which is
Hey, everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, if this is your first time listening to the What is Money Show, I strongly recommend that you go back to episodes 1 through 9 first, which lays a lot of the groundwork for many of the concepts that we explore on the show. These first 9 episodes are my series with Michael Saylor, and thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard, hands down, and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I don't think there's any place better that you can start other than episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The What is Money Show is 100% sponsor based. So all of our revenues are derived from direct sponsorships. And I strive to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically only using sponsors that I use personally, and also choosing sponsors that have values which are well aligned to the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do now is a few ad reads right at the top of the show, and then I'll do a few more ad reads in the middle. And I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as again, these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer. Today's podcast is brought to you by In Wolf's Clothing. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times per year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that help fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. So go to wolfnyc.com to learn more about the program or apply. Again, that's wolfnyc, WOLFNYC.com. Darrell Bock, welcome to the What is Money Show.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be with you.
So nice to have you. You are the latest guest that we've had on from the God Bless Bitcoin documentary. You're one of the religious figures appearing in that documentary, speaking about, I guess, the relationship between Christianity and money/Bitcoin. And just by way of quick introduction, you are the executive director of cultural engagement at the Hendricks Center of Christian Leadership. And you're also the senior research professor in New Testament studies at Dallas Theological Seminary.
That's correct.
So maybe before we get into our specific questions, I think it would be useful for the audience just to learn a little bit about your personal journey into Bitcoin, and how you became involved with this documentary from the Christian perspective.
Well, I think it would be fair to say I don't have much connection between myself and Bitcoin per se, but I knew someone who was involved in this project who asked if I would be willing to talk about a biblical perspective on money in general in the Bible. And so they asked me if I would be a part of the documentary, and I said I'd be glad to talk about that topic. And so we did interviews on that topic, and so that's how I got connected with the Bitcoin discussion. I don't have any actually any experience at all with Bitcoin. So so from that standpoint, I'm I guess I'm about as neutral a figure as you can run into on this topic. So yeah. So I don't. It was more for the perspective of thinking through the biblical values and the moral values associated with money that the Bible talks about that I've been involved.
So have you been, I mean, obviously the Bible mentions money many, many times. I've heard somewhere that roughly one quarter of Jesus's parables involved money as a metaphor. I'm not sure if that number is correct. Is it something you've specifically studied in your course of work? Is money in the Bible, or is it just
Yeah, I
something that's
did an
come up?
article. I did an article years ago for a conference in Norway, in which I talked about the role of money. And money, but behind money in the Bible is the whole issue of stewardship and
Hmm.
managing resources that God provides us with, and doing that well. That's rooted in really the beginning part of the story of the Bible, which is that uh, male and female were created in the image of God to reflect His presence and character in our lives, and that the idea of managing and stewarding the creation well in which He has placed us is actually one of the most important core values of the entire Bible.
Hmm.
And so money becomes a part of that conversation. So that's where it starts, is with the idea of we are stewards of the resources that God gives us, that He's placed in the creation, and we're
Hmm.
supposed to be theoretically good stewards of that. I like to joke that we're made to be hummers. We're designed to make the creation hum and be functional. And unfortunately, sometimes we aren't very good at that. And so that becomes the challenge of Christian faith, is dealing with who we were made to be, what we aspire to be, and then sometimes what we actually are, and the difference that produces.
Fantastic. Well, so what we have today is a framework of kind of elemental questions, and they're really intended to draw out some deeper discussion. In that the questions are very, I guess you could say, ontological in nature, right? We're asking about very big ideas, and really just trying to get you to define them, and hopefully just lead us into some interesting discussion about the nature of money through a Christian lens. So one of the definitions of money, uh, we've encountered many definitions on the show titled "What is Money?" as you might imagine. One of them is that money is the ultimate tool for economic freedom because it provides individuals essentially limitless choice in the marketplace. It can be used to acquire any good or service that the marketplace can bear. So, to get rolling on these questions, may we start with the first one to you, which is, what is freedom?
Well, freedom is the space that I have basically to make choices.
Hmm.
Freedom's about choices, and having freedom is the ability to make choices and to be responsible for those choices. So freedom has consequences as well.
Hmm.
Uh, and so, when we talk about this theologically, we say, I'm free to make all kinds of choices, but that doesn't mean that every choice I make is a good one.
Hmm.
Every choice that I make is a beneficial one.
Hmm.
So we tend to talk about freedom in the abstract and emphasize the fact that we have freedom, but we tend to think less about the consequences of those choices that we make,
Hmm.
which are which are the how can I say that, the intended or unintended consequences that come from making certain choices. So uh, and we tend to elevate particularly in Western culture, we tend to elevate our freedom, and particularly our individual freedom. But if
Hmm.
we don't think about the responsibility that also comes with that, that can become problematic. And my illustration is a little bit like thinking about driving, and pretend that you don't have lanes and any rules when you drive. Everyone gets to do what's right in their own eyes. They're free to do what's right in their own eyes. Okay. I think we would automatically understand that could be pretty chaotic. And in fact, if you go to certain parts of the world where that's how people drive, you understand that chaos because you experience it. Um, and so that's kind of a picture of what's going on. And so we have on the backside an obligation to wrestle with the consequences of the freedom that we possess. and the responsibility that that freedom actually brings to us as people who have choices, whose choices impact other people and other realities.
I love that you brought up the example of driving, actually, because this is the example that I often cite when I'm talking about this kind of paradoxical nature of freedom, in that, for instance, you described freedom as the space to make choices.
Mm-hmm.
But if we limit the space to make choices in certain respects, we can actually broaden the space to make choices in other respects. So, for instance, in the US, we all agree to drive on the right hand side of the road, right? So we're limiting our space to choose, right? Do we drive on the right or do
Right,
we drive
right.
on the left?
Yep.
We all agree to drive on the right. And in doing so, we free ourselves up to make really to have greater freedom in terms of movement, right? We can get from A to B more quickly without navigating endless car accidents. And so it seems like there's this strange element of freedom in that when we make certain agreements to limit our own options individually, that we can expand our options collectively or in a broader consideration of the world. So
And since we're using a picture, and yet, even though we agree to say we can drive on the right hand side of the road, we don't apply that rule so absolutely that you can't pass, provided there are not people coming from the other side of the road.
right, right.
So there's still choices that remain within those choices that allow for the flexibility of where we find ourselves, and don't preclude certain things from happening that we all recognize. Well, as long as there's not a danger in place, passing someone by going to their left is doable.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a great point. And then I would wonder how that plays into this, because I usually cite that example as a corollary for the nature of private property, actually, so that if we all agree that each of us has the exclusive rights to the things that we justly acquire, right, the fruits of our own labor, then we can actually increase aggregate wealth production, right, our standards of living. But if we don't agree, if we don't all abide by that social agreement, then we can actually unravel the social fabric, right? If people start to steal from one another, well, then it disincentivizes other people from respecting that agreement. And before you know it, we're just kind of in this basic animal situation. So I wonder.
And that's why I started where I did with stewardship, because on the one hand, yes, there is the right to private property, et cetera, but there also is a stewardship element to the resources that we have. That means, how do I handle the things that are my own, and for what purposes do I use them? Do I use them in a way that is reflective of the self, or do I use them in a way that in a stewardship and use and sharing of resources is a way that can also benefit others and work to benefit others? Those are part of the freedom choices that I have in the system that we operate from. So, and then everyone is negotiating how to take, and this is actually the principle behind taxes. Principle behind taxes is that there's a corporate benefit to us pooling at least some of our resources that we each earn that privately belong to us, so that we can accomplish certain things corporately in our society together that require a certain mass of funds and resources in order to be accomplished. Someone's got. I'm not going to go out and outside the front door of my house and build the portion of road that attaches to my property.
All right.
The guy next to me isn't going to do that. That isn't going to do any good.
Right.
So it's those kinds of questions. So it's balancing the right to private property with thinking about what are my responsibilities to the people that I live next to, my neighbors, my city, my country, et cetera, that tell me I also have an obligation to think about how I contribute to society as a citizen, that kind of question.
It's a good point. So how do we hold the tax authority in check, though? Because it's like, okay, sure, we need to pool resources for some things perhaps, but there does as we've seen throughout history, right? Sometimes these tax authorities go too far and they just start to
Right.
abuse their power. So how do you navigate between the beacons of individual freedom and this need for collective
Well, this is
support?
why we have politics. I mean, politics is a space where this gets done. This is why people vote as a corporate entity about what they feel like their corporate responsibilities are to be. This is why we debate how much is enough and for what purposes and that kind of thing. That's why you have the societal structures that are designed to wrestle with these questions and ask, as a community as a whole, how do we think about this? And you get some people who emphasize the individual rights and individual sets of concerns, and then you have other people who are emphasizing the corporate benefits, et cetera, and they kind of push and pull against each other.
Hmm.
And then we get everything that comes with that, the television conversation that comes with it, debates that come with it, et cetera. I mean, you're really talking about the structure, about how you function as a society, people, and particularly people who live next to one another who may have different views about how that ought to be done and what's best and what's most effective. And that becomes the public square.
I see. Okay. So in the Bible, I'm not sure where, but I'm pretty sure at some point God is described as love, right? And I think specifically the ancient Greek word was agape, right? The selfless love that a parent has for a child, something like that. So clearly, to the extent that God is an important concept in the Bible, I think the concept of love is close to that. So if I may ask you our second question, what is love?
Well, love is the display of a appropriate others directed concern. It's primarily relational. There's a wonderful passage in 1 Corinthians 13 that describes love. It goes, love is patient, kind, et cetera. There are all these attributes, relational attributes that get attached to love. And so it is this ability that we have to think about the world outside of ourselves and how we relate to it. And am I going to be hostile towards it? Am I going to be compassionate and empathetic towards it? All the range of emotions that come. And love is the attempt to describe, I guess, the best of what we can be in expressing that concern for others and in being aware of that concern for others. So it's I can be engaged in a self-love, but love, generally speaking, in the Bible is not self-directed. Love in the Bible, generally speaking, is relationally directed, and it's relationally directed in how I think about and engage with other people who also have needs.
Yeah, I've had a gentleman named John Vervaeke on the show, and I don't know who he was citing when he described this, but described love as a reversal of the arrow of relevance. That when we're younger and less mature, we tend to think about how is the world relevant to me, like as if we are the center of the universe. And then at some point, probably especially so when we have children, that arrow of relevance starts to reverse, and we start to think about how are we relevant to other people, to our children, to our loved ones, etc. And you said love is primarily relational. Is that idea related to the Trinity at all? Because it strikes me that the Trinity.
Yes, it is. I mean, one level it is the idea that God has an internal relationship with himself, if I can say it that way.
Yeah.
It certainly is that. It also is a reflection of the great commandment, which is love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. It's all directed towards someone else. I tell people the Bible has an ethical core that's an ethical triangle. And the triangle is I have a relationship with God on the one hand that I'm concerned about. And because I'm concerned about that relationship, that drives me to be concerned about other people. And so there are 3 points. There's the God, there's me, and then there's others. And they're all interacting with one another. And in fact, there's a wonderful passage in Luke chapter 3 where the discussion is repentance. And repentance is a word that we don't talk about very much these days, but it's the idea of, in Greek, it's the idea of changing your mind. And John the Baptist gets asked about what does repentance look like? And most people, when you hear that question, you think, well, repentance is something you do usually between you and God. I mean, it's part of your spiritual relationship. You don't generally think about repentance as something I do with someone else. You might say, well, I might apologize to someone else. I might do wrong to someone else, but I don't think about repenting with regard to someone else. But every time when John the Baptist answers this question, he's talking about how I'm treating other people. So it's kind of a curveball. And it's designed to make you think if repentance is a spiritual relationship between me and God, but every time I translate it into how I interact with others. That's that ethical triangle showing up. Then that impacts the way I view my moral responsibilities as a person, and in some degree drives those. And that's when I care enough about the other person to think about how my behavior impacts them, I am manifesting an element of love.
It's fantastic. Yeah, the Trinity thing is very interesting. I've been reading a book on Neoplatonism about it, and it was making the point that I guess I'll use the word person in the Trinity, right? The Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. That these are relational personas, right? So the Father is defined in relation to the Son. You can't be a father without a son, right? And the Son is defined in relation to the Father.
Right.
And then the Holy Ghost is something like the means of relationality itself. It's like the thing that connects the Father and the Son.
Yeah, the way to say it, the Father, the way it generally works is the Father is kind of the designer and initiator of things. The Son executes those things, and then the Spirit is the means or the power by which those things get executed. And so there's that kind of relational functional dimension to the way the Trinity actually works. And of course, then the backside of that is there's a harmonious relationship between the three of them, so that there is a coherence within their person of how that works. It's, if I loose analogy, not the best, but may get at it, is when a marriage is really functioning well and the two people are really connected to one another. That's the kind of dynamic that we're talking about.
What this is another way that I've tried to think about this, and just let me know if it lands for you or not. But this idea of the word God in a way representing that which is beyond words, right? It's a transcendent reality, for lack of a better term. So when you talked about the I think you call it the primary commandment, right? Love God above all else and love thy neighbor as thyself. Is that saying, like, could that be interpreted as this love or reverence or respect for the unknown tells us that it's in loving that we have to love one another, really, to deal with the horizon of the future, the unknown horizon of the future, as adequately as possible.
The one response I would make is that it's in one sense not an unknown. What you're saying when you're invoking God is that there's a creator and you're a creature. You're made to mirror the rational and relational capabilities that are a reflection of the character of God, who is the creator for all that we have. So there's a personal relational dimension of what we're talking about. It's not just this kind of ethereal, there's something out there. And then to be made in the image of God, hang with me here, because this is not going to be an easy concept. But to be made in the image of God is to image or to reflect that which is the best of God, if I can say it that way, that which reflects his character and who he is. And so that becomes the aspirational goal and orientation of what drives you to be who you are. And in that, then, is this drive underneath that is both the stewardship part that I've talked about, as well as the thinking of others part that I've talked about, which is where you see this manifesting itself and demonstrating itself in the way in which we engage. When everyone becomes interested in their own self-interest, okay, we end up competing with one another. We end up believing that the only way I tell people one of the mistakes that's made in our society at large is that we tend to view our resources as so limited that we think the only way I gain is if you lose. It's a zero. It becomes a zero-sum game.
Yep.
And I'm sitting here going, no, actually, our ability to create and to expand and to use resources positively means that the pool can grow, and that if we actually work together and collaborate together well and steward together well, then it doesn't mean I gain and you lose. It means we all gain.
Yes.
If we do it right, and if we are sufficiently considerate of one another in doing it. And so these are impulses that drive beyond the tendency that we tend to think about, which is only to have our own interests, and to push us in a different direction, so that we're willing to have the conversations about how do we share space together, which is actually what we have to do on this earth. We share space together, and how do we do that and do that well? How do we do that without getting in each other's way?
Yeah, it's interesting that almost goes back to private property for me, right? As we're trying to bound our self-interest where the self-interest of others begin, in a way.
And the Bible has a picture. I tell people the Bible has a picture of our resources and our use of them in the way God provides them for us, and we take possession of them, if we want to think about it that way. But we're supposed to have it with loose hands. We're supposed to ask, how can I use these resources in a way that not only benefits me and my interests and my family and maybe my city, et cetera, but what's the best way to use those resources to become part of this pool that I'm talking about, that allows us to serve one another well and to live together well. And if we hold it too tightly, okay, again, it becomes a competition. But if we hold it loosely in some kind of shareable way that we give careful thought to, then I can balance that which I need and have from that which can possibly serve others.
This is perhaps the call to charity.
Yeah, it's a call to charity. It's just a call to. It's a recognition, and I'm back to the stewardship idea and the creator-creature idea. It's the idea that I share space,
right?
That the space that I live in is not just my own; it's shared space,
right?
So how do I share these spaces together well? How do I share these spaces together so that I'll go back to the metaphor I started with, so that the creation hums? It's one thing to drive a car with gasoline. It's another thing to put water in that gasoline and try and drive.
Right.
And so, I want that car to hum. I don't want it to go in fits and starts.
I see.
Yeah.
We want you to join us for 2 days of discussions and debate, which is all happening at the inaugural Dissident Dialogues 2024.
This incredible event will take place in Brooklyn on May the 3rd and 4th. You'll be joining leading thinkers such as Richard Dawkins, Steven Pinker, Ayaan Ali, John McWhorter, Aisha Akambi, Michael Schellenberger, Mary Harrington, Chris Williamson, Winston Marshall, Konstantin Kisin, Francis Foster, and more.
Hang on a second, since when have you ever been a serious thinker?
I love thinking. It's my favourite hobby. Sometimes, of an evening, it's all I do. Think.
Moving swiftly on, we want you to join us for a gathering where everyone is part of the conversation. Conservatives, progressives, atheists, theists, left, right, and everything in between.
Dissident Dialogues presents a rare opportunity to immerse yourself in a conversation with the most influential thinkers of our time.
We'll tackle important topics relating to religion, science, politics, and culture. If you're driven by intellectual honesty, curiosity, and a desire for the truth, Dissident Dialogues is the place for you.
It's not just an event, it's the beginning of an intellectual journey, and we want you to come along for the ride. I like rides.
Dissident Dialogues is a place for dangerous ideas. Buy your tickets now at dissidentdialogues.org and be part of the conversation.
Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. Over the past 9 years, I've been going through a pretty serious struggle with my personal health. It started with a sharp pain and stiffness in my hip after a lifting injury, which I later learned was related to some pretty extensive inflammation in my gut. Then I developed an autoimmune issue, and soon I was having joint pain all over, skin irritations, and all kinds of digestive issues. I visited many doctors trying to figure out what was wrong, but none of them were able to help me fix any of my issues. I eventually started to see an energy healer with whom I had some limited success, but it wasn't until I started working with the biohacker Anthony DiClementi last year that I was finally able to start making real progress on my healing journey. Anthony spent a lot of time with me learning about my specific situation and worked with me to adapt a custom health plan to address my needs. Anthony has served as a personal biohacker for celebrities, billionaires, and professional athletes all over the world. Besides helping people like me overcome health issues, Anthony and his world-class medical team also help guys that just want to optimize their cognitive performance, guys that want to pack on some muscle, and guys that just want to get shredded. Anthony keeps a tight book of business and is selective about the clients he brings on. To apply for Anthony's biohacking services, text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. Again, to apply for Anthony's biohacking services, just text Breedlove to 847-943-7221. Does the aspirational drive that you mentioned for us to strive to reflect what's best in God, I think as you put it, does that culminate in Christ? Is it Christ basically the model
well,
for
what
that?
you see in Christ is someone who gave himself for that life. I mean, most people who know the Bible know John 3:16. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever should believe in him should not perish but have eternal life. I tease people, it's the only sentence I use the word whosoever in my life. It's not a word I normally am using. Yeah. But the whole point is the short version of this says it this way: God so loved the world that he gave. Okay, so there's this impulse to show how I am here not just for myself, but I'm here also for others. And if I live that way and reflect that and show that concern, and if we all showed that concern, I think we'd have a different world. I tell people, if I'm only interested in my own interests and I'm bumping up against everyone who's also looking after their own interests, that's a pretty chaotic way to live.
Yeah.
But if I'm dealing with people who are concerned for other than me, who are concerned for how I'm living, I have a lot of people who are concerned about how I'm living.
Right.
It's a much better way to live.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And I would say, I mean, most of the people I've interacted with in my life, I think, exhibit that compassion, right? They do care about other people in general, but there's a I don't know if it's a slippery slope. There's some attack surface there for like socialism, communism rhetoric, right? Where they try to get people to do what's in the collective interest, even at their own expense. So how do we protect ourselves against those kind of pseudo-religious ideologies when we're trying to do something
I
that's
think
for
the
the
best
collective
I think
good?
the best protection is kind of where we were a while ago, which is that's the public space and the public engagement, the public in some cases debate, is to ask yourself as a society, where do we as a people who are sharing space together want to balance out that which allows me to be the person I have with the resources God has given me on the one hand, and yet hopefully there's this instinct that says, I also recognize in doing that there is a responsibility to be aware and be willing to share some of what I have so that we all are able to function in a better way. The problem with communism and those kinds of systems is they mandate it.
Gotcha.
Okay. There isn't an appreciation for the moral dimension of that choice. And the fact that if you get buy-in for that choice and everyone understands that and appreciates that, that's one thing. But if you mandate it, that's a different animal.
Gotcha. So it's violating freedom, basically, right? Yeah.
It's violating a kind of freedom by it actually ends up being a dictation that ends up preventing freedom. But again, the flip side of that is you don't want to have so much freedom and so much focus on the individual rights that you lose this collective concern, which we all need to have in order to function well. So that's the balance that you're trying to achieve. And of course, most political dialogue, I do cultural engagement. Most political dialogue is about what I call calibration. It's dealing with values that exist that sometimes when they get dysfunctional and out of whack, they're not calibrated properly. So they bump into one another and they produce tension because they're not aligned properly. Most public discourse is a debate about what the calibration of the pieces ought to be in relationship to one another so that they're in balance. And when we polarize that conversation, which tends to happen, when we polarize that conversation, each side says, this is the value I'm planting my flag on. And this contrastive value, I'm not going to talk about. I'm either going to minimize it or try and reduce its presence. So I lose the conflict that way. But the problem is that other value has merit. And so the question is, how do I calibrate these two things in relationship to each other? That's a much better conversation than to opt for one at the total expense of the other.
Yeah, that's a lot. It's a lot. As someone that's really planted his flag on the side of individualism, I find it difficult. Yeah, it's difficult to. Obviously, there's concern for the greater good, but that's such an ephemeral, slippery term, and it's all so often weaponized by communists, et cetera, that I don't know. You almost want to steer clear of it entirely. But I do hear what you're saying. It's obviously not just about your life. Like, the meaning in life comes through our relations and relationships.
Yeah.
So,
if we overextend individualism, you end up with a world full of conflict. Okay. Because everyone's looking out for their own interests and they feel like they have to protect their own interests. So some sense of collective and some sense of collective responsibility has to exist for society to function well.
Just needs to be opt in, opt out, not
that's
coerced.
right. And it needs to be discussed as a community.
Yeah.
And we need to appreciate that it's a community discussion and we need to value it as a community discussion. And then I think you at least have the chance for a better conversation.
Got it. I think also somewhere in the Bible, and correct me if I'm wrong, it says, I think Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the light, I believe is what he says.
The life.
Sorry, the life.
There's another place where he says he's light, but in that saying, it's I am the way, the truth, and the life.
And the life. Okay. Which is a good segue to my third question for you. What is truth?
Well, in this particular case, truth is not so much concepts, again, as it is this relational orientation to the world. So, I know if someone hasn't thought about this, I'm playing with the way they normally think of truth. Normally we think of that's true, and we're thinking about a statement or concept.
Like a proposition.
That's right. But here, what we're talking about, when Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, he's saying, I am the example of the way to live. I'm the example of the way to interact with people, etc. So when the Bible talks about Jesus being truth, there are concepts underneath it and tied to it, like love that we've talked about, stewardship that we've talked about. But in the core, it's this relational space that says there's a certain way to live that ends up being beneficial, not just to myself, but to those around me.
So it's something like Christ is the exemplar for proper human being or proper human action, something like that.
Yeah, he becomes, okay, now I'm going to go back to the image idea. Okay. Okay, because remember I said we were made in God's image so that we can image God. We can reflect him and his character. He is the reflection of that character. He is the imaging of that character. And you see it not just in ideas, but in the way he engages.
Right.
With
Right. In his actual acts, right? What he
right,
does.
exactly.
Yes. Yeah, this is an area where, I mean, this is where I think it's so valuable. Like, and even when I'm talking to people that are rationally atheistic, I'm saying like, look, it doesn't actually matter if he ever existed, if he was God, if not. It's like just the fact that this story exists and gives us like a role model, really, or someone to emulate, like to strive to be like this. If you could get everyone in the world to strive to be like Christ, then the world you'd basically solve every problem in the world, right? So you could think of it as just like an operating manual for being human in a way.
Yeah, well, it is that. And of course, I would say it makes all the difference in the world, whether he really is who he is, because one, it shows it's possible. And two, it says, no, there is a structure to the way we ought to live that is embedded in the way we've been created that we have to appreciate. And if we simply say, this is aspirational, or I hope this is true, that's nice and it can take us some of the way. But when the hard times come and when the pressure comes, we'll tend to fall away from it because we won't believe it as being kind of inherently embedded in who we're designed to be. And so there's something weighty about that being not just an aspiration, but a real presence and a real example.
Well, that's interesting then, because that plays into the concept of truth in a way, right? Like if the the historicity of Christ is true, then we have more conviction in the enacted truth that he represents.
Exactly right. Yeah, and it gives us a basis for appealing to the fact that this is the most authentic way to be living. It's embedded in what it is that's been created.
Fascinating. Okay, obviously Jesus of Nazareth, who I typically refer to as Christ, but I realize not everyone thinks he is Christ, but that's how I'm referring to him. He met what many would describe, I think, as an unjust end, right? He came, he was murdered by the state effectively, right? And for really no crime. So it doesn't seem like justice was done for him. Although the story isn't complete, obviously, at the cross, there's more to it than that. So to segue into the next question, what is justice?
Justice then is provided in two metaphors that come primarily out of the Old Testament. One is what's called a balanced scale, and the other is a flat ground, okay, a level ground where where everybody shares the same level, where everybody has the same balance. So that's what the interesting thing about Jesus's injustice argument is it's only unjust if he wasn't who he claimed to be. Okay. Because the option of the cross was Jesus was claiming this special relationship with God, this special role that he had in the plan of God. If he didn't have it, he was lying and deceiving people. But if it really was who he was, then it was unjust. Okay? And of course, the resurrection in the context of Christian theology is God's vote in that dispute. Okay. God. So is he from above or is he deceiving us and from below? That's really the choice the Bible gives you. And the resurrection is God's vote in that dispute. The state said Jesus isn't who he claimed to be. He claimed to be the Christ, but he wasn't. Rome appoints the kings. And Jesus saying, no, God's going to vindicate me. If you crucify me, I'm going to be seated at the right hand of God one day, and God's going to act on my behalf and show you who I am. And the resurrection is that vindication. We never talk about that on Easter, but that's actually what Easter is all about.
Wow.
And of course, the life that we have on the other end of that, yes, it's true that it shows that there's also life after death, but the life after death doesn't mean anything unless Jesus has done and provided what he claimed to provide. So So we miss that step oftentimes. And so that's what it's about. So justice, just to come back to justice, is the idea that because we're all made in the image of God, we all have certain inherent rights, and we all have represent a sacred presence in the world. And that means there ought to be balanced scales. There ought to be a level playing field for people. And when those scales go out of whack, or when that playing field is not level, that's injustice.
I'm reminded here of, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a verse that says something like a false weights and measure is an abomination to the Lord.
That's right, because it represents the distortion of what should be balanced. Right.
And this plays very nicely into the description of Bitcoin, right? That Bitcoin is a just weights and measure in the sphere of money. I've also described it as a level playing field, right? We've never had one rule set for money. I mean, I guess gold was kind of like the historical analogy that no one could change the rules of gold. That's why it became kind of the de facto universal money. But there's never been a man-made money, let's say, that had fixed rules until Bitcoin. So I wonder what you think just about that. Like, how does Bitcoin fit into the nature of justice?
Again, I don't know much about Bitcoin, so I can't comment on how that works and how that operates. But I will say this. I think that the other issue with regard to money, in fact, it's with regard to creation in general and stewardship is the issue of access. Okay. I've got to be able to have access to the benefits that exist in order to function well. And I mean, most of us talk about I got to have a means of living. That's what our money gives us, a means by which we can live. And so the issue of access is also a part of the justice discussion. Because if there isn't equal access to the resources that exist, or equal access to the opportunity to gain resources, I can form it that way, then that can become a problem, because some end up with more than others, some are able to do more than others, et cetera. Right. So even though the rules of, I'll say it this way, the rules of the currency can be consistent, but if the access to the currency is not consistent or not balanced, then that inevitably produces imbalances. And when I get those imbalances, I have injustice.
Interesting. So yeah, that's interesting that that metaphor that's invoked for justice is a good descriptor for Bitcoin. One last question about this, and this is a kind of a haunting one, I think. Again, correct me where I'm wrong here. Christ said something toward the end of his crucifixion, something like, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Was that an expression of injustice? What did he feel like he had injustice rendered upon him there at the end, or what was it?
Theologically, what people say about that is that's the moment when Jesus is bearing the payment of the sin and the isolation that sin creates that come from other people. So he is unjustly bearing the price of sin so that he can, in a substitution way, pay for what we are not able to pay for ourselves.
Wow.
And so it's what the technical term is vicarious atonement. He is atoning for a sin that he didn't commit, but that others commit, and he's paying the price for it. So that's, most people who read that verse say that's what's going on. Now that verse is important because it's part of a psalm in which, if you read the whole psalm, it ends with a trust in God at the end. And so that some people say, yes, he's singling this verse, but the verse is actually an entryway into the entirety of the psalm. And the entirety of the psalm says, I can trust you, with the understanding that what Jesus does on the cross in bearing injustice now allows the opportunity for justice to come to anyone, because they can receive the forgiveness that he's paid for.
Wow.
And that's actually the core of the Christian message about being able to be restored from that which causes us to fall short in our relationship with God. And it's not something I supply myself. It's something God has supplied for me out of his love. And so the response out of Christianity is this gracious response that recognizes that what I couldn't pay for myself, God has done on my behalf, and I'm grateful for it.
Well, I can't help but notice the metaphors you're invoking, describing that when you say that Christ was paying the price for sin he didn't commit. That's obviously a monetary metaphor, and also reminds me of the verse, the wages of sin are death, or the wages of sin is death, something like that. It's another monetary metaphor.
That's right.
So what is why all these monetary metaphors to describe the nature of sin and death and redemption?
Because sin itself is described in the Bible as a debt.
Ah.
Okay. So, sin gets described in two ways. One is it's missing the mark. Okay.
Yeah,
it isn't what it's supposed to be. That's the way most people will think about sin.
Hamartia, is that the word? Or
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, but the second one is the idea of sin is seen as a debt. So some versions of the Lord's Prayer, okay, run, forgive us our debts. He's not talking about your bank account.
Right.
Okay. He hasn't gone to your bank and said, I want you to get that, I want you to move that from the red to the black. Okay.
And the other word there is trespasses, which is an interesting.
That's right. That's right. So,
property,
so what you've got in the two gospels is you've got the description, which is a trespass.
Yeah.
But you've got the effect, which is a debt. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so those two renderings are talking about the same concept, but from different angles.
Wow. So there is, so missing the mark and debt.
Missing the mark is the description of what sin is.
Yes.
I aim and aspire to something, but I don't meet the standard that it represents.
Yes.
Okay. The result of that is a debt.
Right.
Okay. I'm not who I ought to be, and I've come up short, and there's a cost.
Yes.
There's a cost to coming up short.
Thanks to my friends at Swan Bitcoin for supporting the show. Swan sponsored the Sailor series, and I appreciate their support from the very beginning of the What is Money show, and I'm happy to welcome them back. Swan has grown a lot since then. They've built a full-service, Bitcoin-centric financial services company with several different offerings. With the Swan app, you can set up instant and recurring Bitcoin buys. And with this, you can get started at swan.com/breedlove. Swan also enables clients in the US to hold Bitcoin directly in an IRA account, so you can hold Bitcoin in a tax-advantaged way. Get started at swan.com/IRA. If you're looking to buy more than $100,000 worth of Bitcoin, check out Swan Private. You'll get concierge support for buy execution, retirement accounts, inheritance and estate planning, and access to exclusive events, research, and other content. Get started at swan.com/private. Swan Institutional provides financial services to institutions, including Bitcoin-backed lending, asset management, principal investments, Bitcoin services for financial advisors, and Bitcoin mining operations. For those new to Bitcoin, I recommend checking out Swan's Welcome to Bitcoin course at swan.com/welcome. So go to swan.com/breedlove today to get started on your Bitcoin buying journey. Are you sick of being robbed by politicians through inflation and endless money printing? If so, you need to be at Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville, Tennessee on July 25th through 27th. As the largest Bitcoin and Fintech conference in the world, Bitcoin 2024 stands as a beacon of monetary freedom, a glimmer of hope amongst a darkening macroeconomic backdrop. Top speakers, companies, and thought leaders from across the industry will convene in Nashville to look ahead to the next year and beyond. I will be there, and Bitcoin conferences like this have become my favorite place to socialize since becoming a Bitcoiner. Ticket prices will increase soon. Get your tickets now and secure your spot at this game-changing event. So go to b.tc/conference and use discount code BREEDLOVE to sign up for the Bitcoin 2024 conference. Again, that's b.tc/conference, discount code BREEDLOVE. I want to segue this into our next question because both of those I think pertain to the concept of value, actually,
Mhm.
because in economics, they would say something like value is that which all action is aimed, toward which all action is aimed. So to, move from point A to point B, I have to value point B more than being at point A, right? So every human action is an expression of value, which is you were describing that aiming, right? We're aiming at something, aspiring to do or be something, and then we move towards it, which indicates that we value it. But also the other definition of sin, well, so missing the mark was one definition of sin. The other definition was debt, which
Mhm.
means we owe a sum of value to someone, right? Like we've either either we've borrowed something from them or we've committed to do something for them and we haven't done it yet, right? As an unfulfilled obligation. So what is value?
I would say value, I guess the synonym that I would pick here is the word merit.
Mm,
Something that merits attention
mm,
and that is appreciated for what it is and is worth being connected to. It would be that association of ideas that I would attach to value.
mm,
If something is a value and I recognize it's a value, I appreciate it.
mm-hmm,
Something is a value and I recognize it's a value, I might aspire towards being connected with it. That
mm-hmm.
kind of.
There's clearly though there's differences. I mean, value is some type of a gradient, right? Because we would say, oh, I value the table that I have
Right,
versus I
right,
value my marriage, right? So
right.
is that the same quality of value or are these different types? Like,
Well, there are different types of value, I would say.
okay.
Because one is my relationship to objects, if I can say it
Mm-hmm.
that way,
Yeah.
and the other is related to valuing certain kinds of human relationships that I have.
Yeah.
Marriage is supposed to be one of, if not the ultimate valued relationship that you have
Mm-hmm.
in your life. And that's why when people talk about their spouse as their best friend, I go, well, you probably have that pretty together. Uh, it doesn't mean that I don't have other people who are friends and good friends, but there's something to be said for valuing that marriage at such a level that I say, yeah, this is the person I'm really closest to in the world.
Wow.
And at all kinds of levels of human existence. And that's because again, you appreciate what they bring, what they
Mm-hmm.
represent for your life.
Mm-hmm. Is that why? I mean, it appears to me that most successful marriages seem to be centered on shared values, right? That the two people, well, they value the similar things in life and aspire to a similar shared vision. Is that the relation there?
That's a hard one because my initial reaction to that is I know lots of marriages where if you talk to the two people, they don't agree about everything,
mm-hmm.
but they appreciate one another about how they look at those things.
Mm.
In other words, I sometimes recognize my wife compliments me and see things in ways that I don't,
mm-hmm.
but I appreciate the fact that she sees things that way because she causes me to see things that I otherwise might not see.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so in that situation, I sit there and I go, so I think it has to do less with, if I can say, less with the content being shared
mm-hmm.
as the appreciation of what the combination of the two of you represents.
I see. So there's value in seeing the world through the eyes of others, something like that.
Exactly. And we're back to where we started.
Right. Right. Okay. On the topic of value and the namesake of the show, at least in the sphere of economic value, money is something that's very important. So if I may ask you, sir, what is money?
This is maybe the one I don't have an answer for. Money is something that has been given value okay,
Yeah.
as a means of exchange, okay. The money is what we use to exchange. I give you money, you give me a thing.
Yes.
I give you money, you give me a service.
Right.
Okay. So it's the means we use for exchange. And of course, one person may say, well, that car's worth about $1,000. Another person might come along and say that car's worth $1 million. I mean, who knows?
Right.
The car doesn't come with an inherent value attached to it.
Of course.
Okay. The value that's attached to the car is a result of a series of factors that people and if you overprice something, okay, you're not going to sell it.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're going to end up having it, but your investment in doing it's not going to be good. So, so it's a means of exchange. And then the judgment about whether that exchange is appropriately valued, if I can say it that way, it becomes the marketplace.
Wow. Fascinating. There's another question related to this. It's actually not on the list, but I want to pick your brain about it.
Okay.
Because one of the definitions of money that we've again encountered many on the show, one of them that seems to be quite useful is money is the language of value. Another way of saying that is money is the language of human action in a way. And I know in the Bible that, the word or the logos is where the ancient Greek word comes from. We call it the word in English,
right.
But it meant something like word or ratio. And that's also identified with God in the Bible, right? I think in John 1, right? It talks about in the beginning was the word and the word was
is
God.
Being used in those cases, the word is being, we're back to this relational thing I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
The word is being used here as more like a message or a picture. It's used as a revelation, if I can say that. So when we say, Jesus was the Word, and the Word existed before God, and the Word became flesh. The point here is that there is this imaging. I'm back to that idea. This image that reveals. A revelation is a disclosure,
right?
So it's that discloses something about life and the way it ought to be lived. But let me go back to why you raised this. The idea that money is about valuation is, I think, correct in the sense that, and we're back to the earlier image that I had. If you value something and say, I think it's worth this much,
right?
People who are in the marketplace say, I'm not paying that for this because I don't think it's worth that much.
Right. Exactly.
I don't value it that much.
Yeah. Right.
Right. That shows you that money is a way of assigning value to something. And then it's also the means by which we allow the exchange of that to be. The reason I do the exchange is because I say, whatever the thing is or the service is or whatever that you're giving to me, I value at this rate. And so I give you the money, or I give you my credit card to, reflect that. And boom, we have the exchange. What was yours is now mine.
Yeah. So it's so interesting because, in economics, prices are also called exchange ratios, right? So instead of thinking about how many apples a car costs or how many houses, or how many cars a house costs, or whatever, instead of doing these ratios of goods against one another, we just put all of it in money and then we can communicate about it. So again, the linguistic aspect of money. But that, as you're describing though, that makes money and a pricing system facilitated by money the means by which we reveal preferences to one another, right? That's what the market process is, kind of a bidding process. And whatever the price is saying, well, that's how much of the thing exists and that's how much people want it. Therefore, that's the price. So in terms of revelation being that which reveals or discloses, as you said, was identified with the logos, I think money does have this. I mean, to the extent that language has a logos quality to it, money has a similar logos quality. And I guess this relates to truth as well, because earlier you were saying truth is basically Well, it's full disclosure, right? It's well, that's why Christ is the word. He's the revelation of how to act properly, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's I'm thinking about this as think about how the market actually works. So let's say I have, and now I'm thinking about all the things that are called sales. All right. So, here's the manufacturer retail price, right? And now I'm going to give you a deal. I'm going to take so much off of that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That doesn't mean I value the thing that I'm selling to you less. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But it does mean I'm giving you more of an opportunity to acquire this because you value it than if I kept it at the manufacturer's retail price.
Right.
So we manipulate the market, if I can say it that way, in ways to try and encourage people to exchange,
right,
and obtain. And one of the ways we do this is to say, I'm going to give this to you at a value that is less than what I would normally ask for it at.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing about that is that in most cases, because of the way markups work, you're still, as the seller, doing okay.
Mm-hmm.
You're not just doing as okay
Mm-hmm.
as if you kept it at the manufacturer retail price.
Right.
And it's only very, very rare when a person really needs to, lower their inventory or whatever, that they take the chance of actually lowering that down so low that they actually are giving it at a value that represents a loss to them.
Right. Right. Yeah. If they have to liquidate or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really interesting. So then the logos means word or ratio, and then ratios, the ratio, right, is a mathematical concept as well. There's kind of like a sense-making apparatus in the world, right? Whether it's words, whether it's money.
But the point that I'm making with this last point about sales is we manipulate those ratios. Okay.
Is it when you say manipulate? What do you mean by that? Because it's
well, the point is
voluntary, right?
Why do I have a sale? I have a sale because I say I want to sell more of my goods. Okay, right? I want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to sit on the shelf.
Yeah.
I want to sell more of my goods.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to pull that price level down to such a point where and I'm being metaphorical here, but also pictorial. I'm going to entice you.
Right,
to take off the shelf something that when it was at the manufacturer's retail prices, you weren't buying.
You're creating a perceived value, right? By putting this discount percentage on it.
So my point is that there's kind of a third thing going on here in relationship to value by the way we are able to play with value that complicates a two-dimensional look at the space.
I see. That makes sense. Yeah, the word manipulate threw me off because it's really yours to price ultimately, right?
Right.
So charge whatever you want. But
the reason I'm doing it is because of the way I'm trying to get you to respond to what it is that I'm doing.
Yes. You know what this reminds me of is like certain bars and restaurants that will have a long line outside, but then you get inside and there's like 2 tables seated.
Yeah.
It's like this artificial scarcity thing.
Yeah.
Okay. On the topic of the logos ratio segues nicely into my next question. What is rationality?
Rationality is, I have a little fun here. Rationality to me could be sanity. Rationality is a way of thinking about being clear thinking. That's probably how I would define it. That this is rational. This makes sense. You say something's rational, you go, this makes sense.
Right.
So, and again, the hard part of this is that behind the decision to make sense is a judgment.
Right.
Oftentimes about what does make sense.
Right.
So what may be rational to one person or perceived as rational to one person may not be the same for someone else, depending on how they see the world and that kind of thing. So, but rationality is about saying that something makes sense, that it's rational, that it fits together, that it's coherent.
So I guess another synonym for, well, if something is rational, we would also say something like it is reasonable, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's the old adage,
That's the
though.
make sense part.
Yeah, there's the old adage that the heart knows no reason. So are some of the things we've talked about today, like love, I guess we just go to love about the heart. Is love rational? Like, or is it irrational?
Well, when the heart knows no reason, I think that point is raising the human dimension about sometimes we act and we don't act in a way that necessarily makes sense. That necessarily is rational or makes sense. Sometimes our emotions get in the way of what we think about something. I may think about it one way, but I act another way. Why do I do that? Well, it's not because I'm acting rationally. I'm actually running counter to the way I think by this, because in some cases, as an emotional being, my emotions are more controlling than my faculties, if I can say it that way.
So this idea of making sense, I think there's some subjectivity laid in here, right? What makes sense to someone might not make sense to someone else.
Because it's related to my perception and the lenses that I have.
So people, sorry, go ahead.
Well, the lenses are an important concept because they impact every conversation we have. And when I get asked, so what are lenses? I say, all I have to do is I give you one phrase and you understand what I'm talking about. I have to illustrate it. But if I go CNN and Fox, okay, you understand lenses. They're looking at there's the same reality out there. All right. But you listen to the descriptions of the reality that's out there and you wonder if they live on the same planet. Right. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
So because lenses cause us to focus on certain things, and at the same time, they prevent us from seeing certain things.
I see.
That's how they work. And they're like when you go to the eye doctor and he turns the lens this way or that.
Yeah.
That alters the image.
Right. So there's okay, then is religion intended to establish the standards for what makes sense?
Yeah. I mean, religion is a way of saying generally speaking, religion walks into the world and says, let me give you a template for what reality is and how you should look and see it and respond to what's around you. And that's what they offer. And of course, they don't all do the same thing. So there are different religions out there, different lenses, different responses as a result. We have to live with those differences. We have to share that space with people who think differently than we do, et cetera. But religion is a way usually it's a way of sanctioning an understanding and a worldview that exists that becomes an important basis for how I conduct my life.
Use the word sanctioning. That has an interesting ambivalence too, because it can sort of mean sponsoring or condemning, right? In a way.
Yeah. What I'm thinking here is it ends up being a support for how I see the world the way that it is.
Okay.
It sanctions. It's the support. It's the warrant. It's the rationale. If I can go back to that. Right. For why I see the world this way and not that. That's what I mean by sanction.
Is there?
I don't mean it as a penalty. In other words, I don't mean it as a penalty.
Right. Inherent to that support of one worldview is perhaps a condemning of other worldviews. Is this why we have religious?
It might.
conflicts?
It depends. Yeah. It depends on the religion. Some religions are very open in what they tolerate, and then other religions are much more closed in saying, no, this is the way to see the world. End of discussion.
Where would you put Christianity on that spectrum?
It depends. There are certain things that very much say the world operates within these parameters. They are not up for grabs. And then there are other things where it says this isn't at the top layer. Okay, so there's more flexibility. So it depends on what you're talking about. But with regard to the existence of God, the sacredness of human life, the idea that we're made in the image of God, the importance of forgiveness and love, those kinds of things, that, they're kind of the top core layer.
Fantastic. It seems to me, and I don't know what you think about this, but religion also seems to be intimately intertwined with morality. Like morality often comes from religion, or we develop moral intuitions as a result of the religious frameworks we operate within. So my next question is, what is morality?
Well, morality is, and we're actually back to the first question in some ways. Morality is the recognition that although I have freedom, there are certain choices that are better for me and better for others than other choices. It's the right thing to do. To do this and not that is the right thing to do. And so to do this and do that, to do this and not that is the most beneficial way to act, respond to a particular situation, that kind of thing. That's morality. And what some people will say is, if we're just here as random beings without a grounding in something that reflects a creator-creature relationship, there is no morality. Everyone chooses what's right in their own eyes.
Right. Relativism.
Okay, now we're back to an earlier metaphor, which is everyone's in a car, driving the way they see fit.
Right.
Crashing into each other in the process.
Yeah. So we have to unify ourselves under some common principle or principles.
Correct. The pursuit of common good is a way to try and get at this, even when there may be differences in the religious beliefs that we have and that kind of thing.
Would it be safe to say that the moral thing to do or the right thing to do is what you would wish to be done even if you didn't exist?
In a sense, yes. I mean, I think the right, except the term here, wish is wishy-washy. It's the idea that that what is done. It's, I'm back to the stewardship picture again. What you do, what's hopefully best for the most who are concerned or involved in what it is that you're deciding. It's this others-oriented thing that says, in some cases it may not be what I want or what's in my best interest, but it may be a situation where this is in our interest. And there are times in which that has to be the priority. This might be good for me, but if it's good for me, it may be bad for most everyone or others around me. Okay. Or do I want that which may not be as good for me, but it may be better for everybody else? And how do I face that decision when it happens?
Yeah, that one is tricky indeed. Okay. I guess I'll just move on to the last question here, which is definitely not the easiest one. What is God?
Yeah, and I'll change it. It's who is God?
Ah.
So God's not a thing. He is a person. And I think the two most fundamental images to think about God is he is the creator on whom our existence depends.
Right.
And he is the redeemer. He is the one who has tried to provide a way to make us better than we currently are.
Right. God is the creator.
Which means I'm a creature responsible in my relationship with God. I am responsible to him as the one who made me.
Right.
Okay. So it puts me in a dependent but relational position in which what he offers me can help me make more out of life on the one hand, but to ignore him is to abandon your life to a kind of chaos, or what I call suspension in midair that isn't going to serve you very well.
So God is a creator, right? God is also in all things, right? This is the omnipotent,
Well,
omniscient.
he's present with relationship to all things.
Okay.
I wouldn't say he's in all things. That makes the creation the creator. We don't want to. That's not what Christianity does.
Okay. So he's present in relation to all things.
Yes.
Does that make reality? I mean, I was going to ask, I mean, maybe this changes when you say in relation to rather than in all things. Does that mean reality is alive in some way? If God is alive and reality?
Well, I think what I would say is it makes everything to some degree, different levels, sacred. That's why it has to be stewarded. Okay. It's worth managing, if I can say it that way.
And when you say managing,
that's the stewardship part. Stewardship is managing your resources, managing the gifts and opportunities that you have well, that kind of thing. So and we're back to the term of value. It's worth it. It's worth it to do this. It's valuable to do this. It's actually beneficial to do this. That kind of thing.
This sounds faintly economical in a way, right? The stewarding resources. And I think even the word economical comes from managing the household. And it sounds...
Well, that's the point. The point is that when I started off by saying, before we talk about money, let's talk about stewardship.
Right.
Okay. Because the creation mandate of Genesis 1 was about stewardship. It's to be fruitful, multiply, subdue the earth.
Right.
Okay. Subduing is a management term. Okay. So that's why we're made to be hummers. Okay. We want the creation to hum, and we are the ones who create the opportunity for the creation to hum, just like we create the opportunity for the creation not to hum and to be dysfunctional. So, and I'll let you judge how well we're doing on that scale.
I think that's a great place to end it. Darrell, this has been a very insightful conversation. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Robert. Glad to do it.
Where can people find you on the internet?
We are at the Dallas Seminary podcast website called the Table Podcast. So it's voice.dts.edu/table podcast. We welcome the table. We discuss issues of God and culture, which is a nice way of saying we discuss anything and everything. And we try and show the relevance of theology to everyday life. And so that we've done almost 600 episodes. We'll be doing our 600th episode this month. We've been doing it for well over a decade. And we talk about all kinds of things in relationship to theology. So I just invite people to take a look at that and take their pick of what's there and wish everybody well.
Amazing. Thank you again for joining me today.
Glad to do it.